No problem.
Shall we start? Letitia,
Sure.
shall we start? Is it okay?
Yep.
Yes, you can go ahead.
Okay, let's go.
Go for it. Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Sylvia Bade. I'm a nephrologist at Groote Hospital, which is located in Cape Town, South Africa. And I'm a co-leader of the education subcommittee for the Young Nephrologist Committee of AFRAN. I'm honored to introduce Professor Sarla Naika, who is beloved throughout Africa and who will be moderating this important research session. So Professor Naika is an Emeritus Professor of Medicine at Wits University, and she's an exemplary leader, having been the academic head of Department of Medicine at Wits before, as well as the previous head of Division of Nephrology, both at Wits and at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. She's also previously been the head of the South African Renal Society and previously the president of the South African Transplant Society. In addition to this, she's also chaired the South African Ministerial Advisory Committee for Transplantation, and she is currently a member of the Executive Council of AFRAN, as well as a member of the Executive Council of the South African Nephrology Society until present. She served on numerous national and international associations and is highly accomplished with many awards. And she's an incredible mentor, having supervised over 50 postgraduate students ranging from master's to PhD level, and has had over 200 publications. And with this, I'd like to hand over to Professor Naika.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. It's my great pleasure to welcome everybody, and especially to welcome Professor Ikechi Opechi, one of my favorite Africans, all-time favorite Africans, as you know, Ike. So,
I know.
So Ike is well known to all of us. He's an honorary professor of medicine at the University of Cape Town and former head of nephrology at UCT. He was a member of the KDIGO Executive Committee and former chair of the ISN Fellowship Program. And he has over 200 peer-reviewed publications. He's a researcher currently at the University of Alberta, Canada, and is a member of the ISN Global Kidney Health Atlas Steering Committee, which is providing very important data for us globally as well as in Africa. I was really happy to see the most recent iteration of the Atlas showing us wonderful data on Africa. Now, Ike is going to talk about preparing a bankable clinical research project. And I personally am so delighted that you're going to speak on it, because everybody talks about research projects without looking at the other half, which is how to get the money. So I hope you're going to tell us, Ike. So welcome, and the floor is yours, or the screen's yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Naika. And thank you, Zibia. Zibia, I think you made an error. You said Professor Naika is well beloved in Africa. She's well beloved worldwide. It's not just in
Apologies.
She's well beloved worldwide and not just in Africa. And I want to thank your committee, the Young Nephrology Committee, for inviting me to present today to the group on preparing a bankable clinical research project. Yannick contacted me probably a month or so ago, probably 6 weeks ago, I can't remember which, really, and said, oh, he would like, for me to present this. But at the time, like Professor Naika was just saying, we were like neck deep in, pushing out papers for ISN GKHA, and we still continue to submit. In fact, it's really strange. So I said, you know what, I've got quite a lot going on. Think, World Congress of Nephrology is coming up, and if we can do it now, that would be great. I know now would not be the most ideal time to prepare or present this topic, because I think Yannick had mentioned to me that this is to help people applying for the ISN Clinical Research Fellowship program, which I think the deadline is just next week. So if you are in the audience and you are applying for the ISN Clinical Research Fellowship, I'm sure by now your research is already set, and maybe there are one or two things you can pick out of this. If you are in the audience and you are planning to apply maybe next year, perhaps there may be more for you to pick out of this. And if you are just an innocent bystander and you just decided, well, I'm bored, let me just go hear what's going on, then I guess there may be one or two things as well for you to take out of this. I think this will just be the quick outline for this talk. I will do a quick overview of research capacity, research methodologies and designs, and then talk about steps to a high quality clinical research. And then we'll focus on research funding per se, and then we'll quickly review the ISN clinical research program call, the current call, and I think we should have time for questions and discussions. One of the problems we've had in Africa is not having a lot of, very sound, robust, research in comparison with the rest of the world. I couldn't find any more latest or recent publication on bibliographies or bibliometric assessments, but this was published in 2005, which is the closest thing I have, and I'm sure represents or reflects, what the status is. So these are across regions, some cases country like the US, number of research articles published in top 50 biomedical journals in 1998. Actually, in this paper, they gave it a series from 1995, 6, 7, and 8. I took the latest one. And you can see Africa in the top biomedical journals, 21, compared to Western Europe or the United States of America. This was actually from this morning. I woke up and I thought, oh, it would be nice to show this. Then I quickly went to clinicaltrials.gov and I just searched for chronic kidney disease clinical trials. And this is what we find there. So you will find that other than Central America and maybe India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, South Asia region, Africa has one of the fewest clinical trials that are registered on clinicaltrials.gov. And if we zoom into Africa, find that most of the clinical trials are actually in Egypt and South Africa, with very little happening in many countries and almost none in other countries registered. We did a bibliometric assessment of nephrology publications a few years ago. Some of you will know JJ, Jean-Jacques Nubia. So we did this work together and we look at nephrology publications in Africa over a 5-decade period. And when you look at it, we did exclude certain publications like publications related to hypertension, research articles, letters, and all of that, just focusing on core nephrology publications. We find again that this is their distribution. And in fact, you find that only 3 countries, South Africa, Nigeria, and Egypt, have more than 100 articles that are published in journals with an impact factor. When Yannick contacted me and said that the title would be How to Prepare a Bankable Clinical Research Project, I'll be honest, it was the first time I'd heard the word bankable. Of course, I know what banking means, but I had to go check bankability and what bankable stood for. And essentially refers to the ability of an asset, project, or entity to generate enough cash flow to attract financing or investment. It's almost like Shark Tank, if you guys watch Shark Tank, where somebody comes to pitch their project idea to some business moguls, and the moguls, sort of assess the idea and see if they are willing to fund it because this person has got an idea that is likely to make money. So when you're applying for a clinical research funding or project, you need to think about the person who is going to be reading my protocol. Will he like it? Will she like it? Will they look at it as something that will make an impact? Not because we want to generate funds from our clinical research, but we want to generate substantive or substantial knowledge. We want to be able to make a difference or an impact in community or in practice. And that is one of the key things that will help enable your project to, well, I call it to be bankable or to be funded. And I think this summarizes what the key purpose of research is. Often, and I have also been guilty of this, sometimes our purpose of research is just to publish a paper. And I've come to realize that that is not right. The purpose should be to advance knowledge. There are gaps in knowledge, and I want to advance it. We don't know, somebody has done this work, but we don't know so much. So I want to push and bridge that gap and close that gap, more or less. Or if I do this research, it becomes something that can be translated into practice that will benefit patients, that will benefit the community. And it doesn't have to be per se number-related research where I'm measuring creatinine. I could look at things of like, how can I improve wait times with referral for patients with chronic kidney disease? Or how can I improve speedy assessment for patients with kidney disease who come into casualty? One will be able to think through that, see how the system works, and then develop an idea to close that gap. There are various types of research, as we know. I will not be defining all of this, but case reports, you see a case that is like very interesting, it's not common, it is a form of research, and then you can summarize that one case, or if you have a collection of cases that are similar, but they are not quite a lot, you can provide information on it so that people know about it. And then cross-sectional survey, case control studies, cohort studies where you follow up a group of people and track their risk factors and outcomes over time. Excuse me, and on and on. The research types or designs that have the best sort of like strength. The strength of their conclusions are much higher if you do a systematic review and meta-analysis. I don't think that that will be funded for this call. I've looked through the call, although a systematic review can be part of your work, but it's not entirely going to be what you can do to get funded on this call. So if we use that metric to show this top of this iceberg, we need to remember that these are not the only types of research that are available. AI is becoming more and more common in our time, and AI-based precision medicine studies are kind of studies that we can also think about and think about how we can get them done. This one, when I reviewed all of these sort of studies here, the one on all lab data, was kind of quite interesting, especially if you are in a place where you can access patients' data who come into, for instance, your emergency, and they're all on an electronic medical record. If you want to assess, how, let's say something like prevalence, something very easy of people who come in with chronic kidney disease or incidents of AKI or whatever over a period of time, because you are able to access all lab data, you don't need to go into the field. This becomes your field, but you need the knowledge and the capacity to be able to design and develop studies in this sort of domain. We can use the FINDER maps to acronym to assess the qualities of a good clinical research. A good clinical research should be one that is feasible. It's within the ability of the investigator to carry it out. The appropriate number of subjects, methodology is very robust. There's sufficient time to get it done, and funds are available to execute the study. Be realistic. Its feasibility also means the investigator is realistic about the scope and scale of the project and has access to people, gadgets, documents, statistics, and data that will be required to complete the study. It's one also that is interesting. One has a real grounded interest in one's research question, and one can explore this and back it up. If you're not interested in a study, there's no point getting into it because you're just going to be bored. Down the, as we talk along, I will show us a study I once did that I actually had zero interest in it, almost zero, I would say, interest in it. But I think I just did it because it was part of my project to complete my fellowship back home in Nigeria and all of that. But I wasn't interested in it. And once I got it done and finished, got it published, I moved away from it. So a research project must be one that is interesting, must be novel, meaning it's not just you copying somebody else's question or what someone else has done and trying to reinvent the wheel. Lots of people have done studies. For example, in Africa, where I think there is a meeting happening now, the Kidigo meeting or something, a meeting on Apple L1. We've done a lot of studies on Apple L1 in Africa. So you don't want to go and repeat what somebody else has done. You try and think, how can I move from this and use that information this person has generated, which is very good, and do something else, with it. May aim at confirming or refuting already established findings and so on, and should show imagination of the researcher, to show that, oh, this person is actually thinking out of the box. This person is bringing in new technologies and new ideas on how to implement or on how to research this subject. Maybe you're using new tools or new statistical methods that you've learned, and you want to apply it into analysis to be able to show something that is different. And it should be ethical. And I think we will continue to emphasize this, that any study we are going to do requires ethical clearance. You must get clearance from your research ethics committee before you start. And it's one that minimizes risk of harm to the participant. You don't want to do a study, for example, where you want to look at catheter insertion, in people with CKD, and you have a cohort of people with CKD who cannot really pay for dialysis. But because you are able to get catheters from wherever and you recruit them, and you know that dialysis needs to be paid for in your center, you include such a patient just to see whether interventional method you are using, is appropriate, because you're just going to increase harm to such patients. It protects privacy, maintains confidentiality, and provides the participant's rights to withdraw. The R in final maps is relevant, should be of academic and intellectual interest to people in the field. Again, the point I was making earlier about research I did some time ago that, not a lot of people were interested in, and should preferably arise from issues raised in the current situation, literature, or in practice. And yeah, we should be able to source what is the thing in current literature. I know in Africa, we don't have a lot, but you go for a conference and you see somebody talking about something and you think, well, this is applicable to patients back home, and I can find a way to do this that will be relevant, and it will be of relevance to patients in my country. So the steps sorry, I don't think I went through all of that. It should be manageable, should be appropriate, should be publishable. And often this is the main reason why we decide to do a research, because we want to get a publication out of it, which is good. And there's nothing wrong wrong with that. But it should be logical and appropriate logically and scientifically for the community and institution. And should exist within a clinical consumer and policymaking context that is amenable to evidence-based change. And there should be a systematic process to it. It's not just a random set of ideas that one has put together. This will be the part where I'll just focus. Sorry, the air in Calgary is dry, so my voice is a little bit hoarse. I apologize for that. But these are the steps to a high quality clinical research. The first is to select and refine a good question. A good question is always important and critical towards what we do in research. We need to select a good question. And for you to be able to do this, you need to consult widely to those who know, to colleagues who may be interested or who run clinics with such patients. You need to seek mentorship and guidance from experienced researcher. Like Zibia said at the beginning, Sarala Naika is someone who is really sought after in Africa, and she's done quite a lot of work in research. If you don't have to be in South Africa to write to her, you can be in Zambia and write to her and say, I'm thinking of doing this research, and this is just a summary of it. What do you think the major hurdles that we face, or how can I get it done? And mentors will be able to guide you appropriately. Ensure your question has not already been answered, and I think we mentioned this earlier. You are not reinventing the wheel. A systematic review is a good place to start. Choose the right study design. Design your study to ensure it answers the question reliably, and consult widely to get comments on your research design. These three highlighted I will focus on because we cannot really have time to go through all of this. So this is how you develop a good research question. Begin by identifying a broader subject of interest. It may be something related to genetics, maybe something related to epidemiology. For instance, chronic kidney disease. What are the factors associated with progression of chronic kidney disease in the community? That is just not simply, because this person has diabetes or this person has hypertension. So you want to identify, if I follow this group of patients up, for example, if I screened within my clinic and identify people with chronic hypertensives with chronic kidney disease, what makes the one person get to see ESRD quicker than the other? And these may not be necessarily things that are measurable by laboratory essence. Could just be things about distance to clinic, funds for getting medication, or adherence to medication, or even other things like I live in the rural area and I have to travel to the city, every 2 months to see the doctor, and I don't often have money. Those are important things to be able to show, because those are things that can then, change practice, or one can start advising policymakers on things that need to be done. So you begin with a broader subject, you do a preliminary research on the topic, what has been done, what literature already exists. And I will say that this is where you need to check what has been done globally, but what has also been done in, for example, Africa. And you can then come down to your country. Has anyone done a study like this in my country before? We search online these days, we're able to find answers to those things. And if you find any, then you see how that relates to what you are thinking to do. What do you still need to know about this? Is there anything that one still needs to know about it? What are the implied questions that I need to ask? How do I narrow the focus of my research? CKD, for example, is a very broad subject. AKI is a very broad subject. But there are many areas that one can then hone down on and say, this is what I would like to do here. And then you create a hypothesis once you create a question. So my hypothesis is that distance does not contribute to poor outcomes of patients with chronic kidney disease. Of course, that is the null if your research design is one of a cross-sectional design. And then when you answer that question later, you are able to say either accept or reject your hypothesis. You can also use commonly what is called the PICO method to develop your research question. So what's my population or patient group? What intervention am I applying? What am I comparing this to? What are the outcomes that I'm looking for? This is a study we are actually working on. We've written protocols of this. We've done a systematic review of this, but we are looking at the impact of telemonitoring and management support on blood pressure compared to usual care in patients with non-dialysis CKD. If we look at this question, the population we're looking at will be people who are not on dialysis with CKD. So that's the population we want to include, whether in our systematic review or in the main study itself. The intervention is blood pressure telemonitoring and management support. Management support being getting a nurse practitioner who the blood pressure that is telemonitored from the patient's home comes to, and the nurse practitioner has been trained to be able to make an advice regarding that blood pressure. If that blood pressure is high, can call the patient and tell the patient what to do. So this is intervention. And the comparator is usual care. Usual care is patient goes to clinic, sees the primary care physician, they write medications, and you're asked to come back in 3 months or 6 months. And we just follow the patient up for that certain period of time. And the outcome we're looking at is impact. But when we think of impact as outcome, this is a very fuzzy outcome, because here we've not really defined what is the outcome we are actually, what is the impact we are actually looking for. So this question can be rephrased into what is the economic impact of telemonitoring and management support on blood pressure and on and on and on. Now we're looking at a specific impact, which is cost. You know, what is the cost of telemonitoring management support to be able to get a blood pressure mean difference that is significant between two groups? Is it worth it? If we don't get significant blood pressure, the amount of money we are spending on these devices and paying the nurse practitioner, is that really worth it? You could do a short systematic review before your study. As we mentioned, I'm not going to focus so much because systematic review is a topic completely different on its own. But these are the steps. You can formulate your research question, identify prior research that has been done. You can write your protocol, state your inclusion and exclusion criteria, register that in Prospero, select specific databases. You don't have to use all databases, as long as you specify what databases you are going to be researching on or getting your studies from. You could decide to focus on PubMed alone or Medline, or because we're in Africa, you know, we could decide to focus on PubMed and African Journal Online, because like I showed earlier, there are lots of African research because of payment for article processing charge. People cannot publish in big journals, and they publish it in smaller journals where either they don't have to pay or the payment is very minimal. So you can then select what potential databases you want to search from, formulate research, refine your search strategy, locate, store, and select studies that will be included, and then assess the study quality, extract and analyze your data, and then publish your report. Doing a systematic review and a meta-analysis strengthens what you want to do. So if you want to do a CKD study, or you want to do a study in transplantation in your center, or you want to do a study on acute kidney injury or something, you know, whatever that is, you could actually decide, I want to do a systematic review on meta-analysis based on studies from Africa alone. You might find that that narrows the pool of data you actually have access to, but at least it helps you, because what you are showing to the funders is, look, I've done a systematic pool of data, and what I find is 1, 2, 3, 4, but I still need to answer these questions 5, 6, 7, and 8, and that can usually be helpful. It's important to choose the right study design because this needs to be stated in your research. I'm going to do, if you're doing a prevalence study, it's going to be a cross-sectional study. If you're looking for incidence of a condition, which means new cases, you're doing a cohort study. If you're looking for risk factors, cohort study, and so on and so forth. A randomized clinical trial, if you're looking for the effect of treatment, not necessarily medication treatment, but also an intervention. For example, the study I was talking about earlier, we are doing actually as a randomized, although that was a systematic review aspect, we are working on as a randomized control trial, where patients are randomized to this intervention of home blood pressure telemonitoring and management support versus those who are randomized to usual care. And that is the treatment effect that we are looking at, the intervention we are looking for, and that is an RCT. So I think an RCT, we just need to point out an RCT doesn't necessarily mean that all the time we're trying a new drug treatment. There are several pros and cons to the different study designs that we select. Case control studies can be helpful in initial assessment of causation. Collection of cases are usually straightforward. Cases and control can be collected in a reasonable time, but the problem with it is it shows association and does not prove causation. Many potential biases in selection of control. There's a potential for bias in data collection. And the same thing as well with cohort studies can produce or provide less biased assessment, potential to include the nested case control study within the same cohort you are looking for, but it can be more expensive, takes a longer time to accumulate cases. Whereas RCTs provide unbiased assessment for benefits and harms, but they take a very long time. You need a very large team. You need a lot of funding to do this. But I've seen simpler, pragmatic RCTs that have been designed that are very easy in terms of funding. And make sure that the study answers the question. Consider piloting to examine acceptability or feasibility of what you want to do and hone in on the study protocol. Always use a Gantt chart to assess. This is a study we are actually currently working on with some team in Africa, actually, where you show when what will begin to happen, when what will end, and so on and so forth. And plan and actively manage your research, study management. You need to have all of that sorted out. How do I follow up my patients? Who needs to call the patients? How do I store my samples? How do I label my samples? And on and on. We need to use transparency in our research. We need to be transparent, publish your methods before you report your results. This is one thing that a lot of people do these days, and you can use standardized reporting guidelines from Equator Network. Whether it's a systematic review or just a normal study you want to do, like for those applying for clinical research funding, you could actually provide a detailed methodology. One of the things that does is it kind of guides you, one, but it shows the people reviewing your study that you have thought this, really through. And then data management, study monitoring, where you assess data quality, storage and backup, and then you have to think of your analytical process. Involve a statistician from start. A descriptive analysis can be very useful. It's not only when you have to look at p-values. If you look at the ISN Global Kidney Health Atlas, one thing you will find is you will never find a p-value in the work we do, but this is a global work and it has a lot of strength in terms of what is being described in availability and access to KRT, and other treatment. And use basic and simple statistical methods often. Use something that people can relate to. Sometimes if you have the capacity to, and you understand it, you can involve complex statistics. So we need money to be able to do our research. And when we do our research, we're able to publish, we're able to attend conferences, we're able to collaborate with others, and you are able to have your own team, maybe a lab, you set up a lab where you have your own team and you pay them salaries and people are different, doing different research. But the truth is all of this is also something that helps you to get back the money. So the more of this you do, the more money you are likely to attract. So even though you are starting off, it's important to always consider, even if you get $5,000 to do a research, it's very important you do it well, you publish it, you show that I completed this research and I followed, it all the way through. But when you are applying, don't take anything for granted. A superb track record is not an excuse for cutting corners and dashing off a poorly thought out submission. So you need, even if you've gotten 2, 3, 4, 5 grants before, at each call, you need to pay attention to what the call entails and make sure it is done well. Put your energy into a few well-crafted submissions instead of, I submitted this last time and it didn't get accepted and I need to resubmit it somewhere else without dealing with what the reviewers have stated. You need to think through that so that you are submitting well-crafted submissions. Look, if you've got a research rejected once, maybe twice, maybe it's time to consider just giving it up and doing something else, because otherwise you'll be wasting your time, on that research protocol. Competition is tough. Usually most submissions, only 10 to 20% get accepted. And you need to remember that you are competing with some of the finest and most valuable, able contemporaries. These are 10 common reasons for funding success. I've highlighted a few. It fits the call. So you need to know what the call is all about. It is well polished and well crafted. It is timely, it is pertinent, it asks good questions for the field. It is hypothesis driven. It is clear. So one thing you must do is not to write protocol. And Professor Mike, I'm sure she will agree with me on this, that if you are reviewing an article and the English is not quite together and there are so many errors of typos and not well formatted, you as the reviewer, you lose interest. Well, I usually would. I lose interest immediately because this person has not taken the time or made clear effort to produce something important. And show that you are passionate about this topic and something that builds on your track record. I put this here not to sort of boast or brag or anything, but this week got a grant from the National Research Foundation of South Africa some years ago, almost $1 million rands. I was going to say dollars, almost $1 million rands to do research on lupus and urinary MCP and TWIC. But for me to be able to get that grant, I was able to show that I'd been doing work on lupus, that I was quite passionate about it in terms of what had been done. And those are things that, you can stay consistent in your area of research. That usually helps. Again, 10 reasons for not getting the funding. Your research question is not clear, it's not objective. It's far too incremental and not a step change. So you remember I was talking about some research I did some years. This is actually one of my starting research. It was on renal acid excretion in hypertensive Black Africans. And we're looking at the sodium hydrogen exchanger, and what it does in terms of removing hydrogen and sodium to equalize acidity and fluids in the body. I'll be honest, this was not research that interested me, but I needed to do this for my thesis back home, and got to have it done. But it's not incremental or step change, because many people who do such research have big laboratory backings back home to be able to do specific tests and assays, which I didn't have access to at the time. I think we've talked about it being dull, not sufficiently exciting. This one, great ideas, but far too ambitious or impractical. And maybe I just talk about this for time's sake. Unclear why this is interesting or what the impact of the work would be. Again, we did this and with one of my students back in South Africa. And I remember one of the reviewers saying, why are you doing this? Don't you have other problems in Africa? You know, because why are you measuring plateau and THSD7A antibodies in biopsies? You know, there are more pressing needs. You don't have dialysis. You don't have, you know, of course, in South Africa, we had that, but the reviewer was looking at it generally from an African point of view. How is this going to change practice? And in hindsight, the reviewer was correct. How was this going to change practice for us? If I was applying for a grant for this, I probably would not get it. Budgeting is important as your methodology. Find out what the monetary limits are. If it doesn't match, even a good project may be rejected. Your budgetary layout should be prepared with prudence, and only the amount necessary for conduct should be asked for. Administrative costs to conduct research projects should also be included in the proposal, and this varies depending on the type of call that is made for the research. Sorry, I'll just quickly run through. I know I'm running out of time so that we can have time for questions. These are things that can be included usually in your research and equipment that is not available in your institution. Some funders will specifically say you can't buy equipment with the research fund you get. Consumables that are required for the conduct of the research should form the bulk of the cost of funding. You may include the cost of hiring a trained personnel, which can be a research assistant, a data entry operator, a statistician, monies for stationery, for travel expense related to the research, even your publication that you anticipate. I'm going to publish a protocol. I'm going to publish the main paper. I'm just giving this as examples. And if I publish here, this is what the cost is. So for instance, this ISN call is $20,000 max. BMJ open publication is about $2,000. BMC is about $1,500 or so dollars. So this may actually count against you because you are putting a lot of money away from the research itself and for the publication. And always think of contingencies. This I got from the ISN current call, and you can see that the consumables for this project that they've given example, which is a hint they are giving to the applicant, is that 96% of your budget actually goes into what you use to run the research, not for equipment and not for miscellaneous things like, you know, paying staff and all of that. And you also need to think about when I complete the project, submit a completion report. Some funding agencies require periodic progress reports. The completion report should have two parts: a scientific report that sort of tells, this is how I conducted the research, these are my findings in summary, and this is what I'm going to do next. And an expense report as well. Often any unutilized funds need to be returned to the funding agency. However, some funding agencies are a bit lax and will just allow you to use it for other things. This is a very important slide, and it's the co-produced pathway to impact. When you complete the research, you must be asking, how do I translate the knowledge gained from this research into practice? Who will I engage? Who will help me to implement my findings? Often our research stops at research and evidence and maybe dissemination, where we go to a conference and present or publish our paper, but we need to learn to how to show that there will be uptake of this work and show in our protocol that I have plans to make sure my hospital sees this work or the Ministry of Health sees this work, and that my findings are implemented. Quickly, I will go through this recent call within the next 3 or 4 minutes and we can end. This is the ISN Clinical Research Program since 2005. you see Nigeria, South Africa have benefited mostly from this program, other than India. I didn't show India because I was talking Africa here. India had received 15 grants, but other countries like Egypt 4, Ghana, and so on and so forth. When I was, chair of the fellowship program, some of these things are subtly taken into consideration. So depending on the number of applications we have, if we have 2 Nigerians, 2 South Africans applying in the current call and 1 Ethiopian in the current call, we would want to help the Ethiopian because Nigeria has benefited, South Africa has benefited often. Well, if the Ethiopians' research is sound, but I'm just putting that out there. That doesn't disadvantage you in any way. You should still put your best foot forward in terms of what you need to do. And I'm thinking that everyone who is applying already knows the kind of programs that will be funded, screening and intervention studies, clinical research studies that addresses specific local needs, acute kidney injury studies, and chronic kidney disease studies, particularly CKDU studies. I don't think we have a lot of that in Africa, but maybe you've noticed that and you want to study it, it will be important. I think we know the eligibility criteria. You have to be ISN full member. You have to be based in a low resource country. But however, for the project, you need to show that you need to know that priority will be given to those from least developed countries, but have a reasonable infrastructure, and that it falls within the call for this funding. You need to get a letter of support from a ISN regional coordinator. Your project should be based between 12 months and 36 months and may not exceed $20,000 what you'll be funded. It may exceed it if you want to do so much more than that. However, I think the ISN is going to limit how much they will fund to $20,000. But then if it's above it, you need to show that I'm making plans to get funding. Sorry, I will continue to use South Africa because I was there all the time, and I know some of the funding agencies, like the National Kidney Foundation of South Africa, has promised to give me $5,000 to make up, for whatever gaps I have, and on and on. The PI, if it's a collaborative study, the PI should be local, the study should be locally led. So if it's a study you are doing amongst African countries, the person who is the PI submitting should be the person based in the country from where that study will stem from. And I think all of these ones are quite relatable and very easy to follow. Again, I don't think we need to talk through this. You need to try and keep to within the maximum and the limits provided for all of these applications. And maybe just to focus a little bit again on the budget request, preferably in Excel format is a suggestion, but they are telling you how they would want to see it so that the budget breakdown per type can be easily assessed. ISN can resolve less than what you requested for if they think that the study wouldn't cost us much, or they want to fund multiple studies and think you can do with fewer funds or lesser amount of money. You may not use the grant for your salary, although you can support some staff like a statistician who will help. Most of the grant, like I mentioned earlier, should not be used for intercontinental travel, Congress registration, or accommodation. If you put most of this in your grant, you are disadvantaging yourself, and that will be a score against you. And I think this is the final slide. Informed consent and ethics. If you don't have an ethics committee in your center, you need to inform the ISN Clinical Research Committee, and they may be able to assess if your study is ethical. But otherwise, every application that you put in needs to have been reviewed and approved by an ethics committee. And I think this is the end of our talk.
Thank you very much, Aki. That was very comprehensive and a very good sort of outline of how to. Before I open to questions. We have just over 10 minutes for questions. So if people could put up their hands or write the questions in the Q&A. There was a question already in the Q&A to ask, will this presentation be available? Because some of them have joined late. So Yannick or Letitia, will this be available? Ike's presentation. I know it's been recorded, but how can people access it?
Prof. Naika, if Professor gives us permission to share, then we're happy to do so.
Yeah, you got my permission. You can share.
Thank you very much.
Is it the recording or do you need my slides? Whichever I can send to you.
Okay.
So we usually make the presentation available, the recording available.
Okay, that's fine then.
Okay, that's excellent, because I thought it was a wonderful overview. And if people follow it, there wouldn't be any gaps at all, you know, so it'll make the funding, the application much easier. Are there any questions as such? While we're waiting for the questions, there's one question that's often exercised me, because I've observed while you mention the type of projects that do get funded, is there a sort of favorite or favored project or theme for a year that's more likely to get funded compared to others? With the ISN?
No, so like they've made this call for these 4 areas, CKDU, chronic kidney disease, AKI, and forgot the last one. But anything that falls within that remit will likely get funded. Prof. Naika, you know as well, you've led the ComGAN group, I think, in ISN before it became the fellowship committee. The process for giving grants is always, it's clear. I don't want to say it's not, ISN has clear pathways, but sometimes other factors come into consideration. So let's say the ISN gets 20 applications, and all 20 applications are, 19 of them are AKI related, and 1 is CKDU related. That one that is CKDU related, because it's the lone study there, and it was well designed, it has no competition within that area. So that study is going to be favorably looked at. Of course, there is no way for applicants to know what is submitted or not submitted. They just go by what clinical studies or research they want to do. And I think for that reason, it's important that in designing your research, like I said, you put your best foot forward. You make sure your study is well designed, you tick all the boxes in terms of all that you require or you need to do to be able to get a good shot at it.
And would you say that locally important questions, relevant questions would be favored? Because that
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Locally designed. So questions that are that can be addressed locally. So let's say your nephrology center is it's in an urban center, but you get a lot of patients from, say, the rural area, and there's a lot of AKI related to snake bites, for example, related to that. You could actually design a study, and your study doesn't have to be 1,000 people, but you are trying to design an intervention to say, well, there's this farming village there and farming village here. So I want to do a quick study where we get funding to buy boots for the farmers in community A and see what happens in terms of reduction in snake bite, envenomation, and AKI between these 2 communities. And so, like I said earlier, so you design this, you can decide. The last time a large review was done on outcomes of people who have AKI from snake bites was probably 10 years ago. None has been done. So I want to look at outcomes of studies. So it doesn't have to be in Africa, it can be global, of studies of prevalence of AKI related to snake bites and outcomes of patients. Prof. Naika, you and Valerie and Gloria did a study some years ago in Lancet Global Health about outcomes of ESRD in Africa, which is a very well-known study and often cited in many publications and congresses. That can then be a good place to begin. So this outcome is very poor. So survival is less than 20% by the time they come in. And I'm thinking by this intervention we're going to improve survival of patients, or it could just be a treatment type that is given to the patients.
Right. Thank you. There's a couple of questions in the chat. One asks, is there a preference for qualitative versus quantitative studies?
No, there is no preference for either study designs. If the qualitative, in fact, sometimes qualitative studies are, in fact, quite informative. The one kind of study that I think they may not really fund is to say you want to do a retrospective study. So these studies need to be prospective. You can decide to do a retrospective study as your pilot, if you like, to answer some questions, and then you look at a cohort going forward. But there is no preference in terms of qualitative versus quantitative study. In fact, this is a good question because, I mean, again, I would say in my earlier research years, I always looked down on qualitative studies for whatever reasons. I don't know, I never really liked them. But I've come to realize that they often answer a lot of questions. That's a study one of our students is doing, and is looking at what impacts, factors associated with long wait times for patients who are referred to nephrology in Alberta. And we're looking at different factors, remote dwelling and all of that. And it's a good question to ask, because when you ask that question and you identify those answers, you are able to address those problems quickly, because you can say, well, maybe we need electronic referral platform to be able to improve referrals. So no preference, long and short, sorry. Yeah.
I think the answer to the next question is quite obvious. Does ISN fund only adult research, or is it open for pediatric nephrology?
Well, I think you already answered that as well. Any research question, can be pediatric, can be adult related.
As long as it's nephrology.
As long as it is nephrology, yeah.
Right, thank you. I don't know if there are any more questions. Yannick, Victorine, any final questions from you before I hand over to Zibia?
No question
Okay.
for me.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Prof, for
Thank you very
this
much.
wonderful presentation. Yannick.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor, for the presentation. I want just to know if there is a one way that we can help a young nephrologist to prepare really a project, because you know that it is not easy for young nephrologists from different countries. For example, from DRC, we don't have anytime a background to realize a good project for the ISN, maybe, but as ISN have some solution for this kind of difficulty for the young nephrologists. I can give one example. If I'm in Chad or other country where I'm a nephrologist, but I don't have a background to realize, I need to realize a good project, but I don't have the background for this. How can ISN can help this kind of nephrologist?
The only way I think the ISN can help for now is through the ISN writing course, which it helps people to write a manuscript but it brings in the idea of critical thinking in preparing your manuscript. And when you think critically about how you develop your manuscript, it helps you to develop a research question as well in that process. That is the only way I know the ISN can help for now. I cannot speak for the ISN. I'm not Mr. ISN. So I can't, but I believe that the ISN Global Kidney Health Atlas, there are a number of people who have been identified as fellows. And I think you, Yannick, you're one of the ISN fellows. Yeah. So ISN Global Kidney Health Atlas fellows. I believe that in the coming, before the next iteration, one of the plans that we have in place is to, sort of engage fellows, in the ISN GKHE work. And that may be a way to help build that capacity. But for now, I have no idea. I think it's something that needs to be done locally. You have a champion in Professor Naika. She's someone, like I said earlier, Zibia said she's well sought after in Africa, but I said no, she's well sought after worldwide. And such a champion should be engaged, to say, Prof, how can you help us in our group? And she can organize small things, get people involved, who can help the Africa or Afran YNC to begin to develop that capacity. Just a final thing to say, there's no place you start from that is too small. Just make an effort. You're writing a paper, you've done a small research. If you can't get it into Kidney International, get it into the Afran Journal, because that is a track record for you. You've done something on hemodialysis. The next step is you want to do something bigger. So when you are sending in your application, which is something I actually failed to talk about, you show your references. You can cite work you have done. And that helps you to say, oh, this guy has done 1, 2, 3, 4 work on hemodialysis outcomes before in Africa. So he has capacity to do this kind of research.
And perhaps for me to add to Yannick and to Victorine, that the Young Nephrologist Committee should have a group of mentors that they could consult. And generally, I think there are enough mentors within Africa and globally who are very keen to help young nephrologists. So I think that would be a good way forward. I think we need to call this very interesting and helpful session to an end. So if I could hand over to you, Zabir. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ike. I personally enjoyed your talk very much, and I wish I'd heard it 30 or more years ago. Thank you.
Yeah, special thank you to Ike. I would like to correct my initial statements, not only Professor Naika, but you also. Also very dear to us. And you are my mentor in getting into nephrology and inspiring and me to do nephrology. So I will always be grateful for that. And thank you for accepting the invitation to do this research session, despite your very busy schedule. And thank you to Professor Naika for moderating the session, and to the Afran ExCom for the supports, and for everybody for participating. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Letitia, for your support. Yannick and Victorine as well. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Zabir.
Bye.